Welcome to Let's Talk Micro. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. As always, I hope you had a great week. And you can always find Let's Talk Micro on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, GoodPods. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Let's Talk Micro. As far as social media, I am on Instagram as Let's Talk Micro, no apostrophe, on Twitter as Let's Talk Micro 1, on LinkedIn as Luis Plaza, TikTok and YouTube as Let's Talk Micro. So please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, leave a review if the app allows you to do so, and definitely continue downloading episodes. And if you have any suggestions, any feedback, you can always email those at letstalkmicro@outlook.com. But as always, thank you for the support. And I am very excited because, Micro 2023 is approaching quickly from the American Society for Microbiology. This is the first time that I'm going to be attending. I wanted to do this for years, but it never worked out. So it finally did this year. So I'm very excited. So hopefully, if you recognize me, if you see me there, just, say hi. I'm going to try to see if I can record an episode while I'm there, but I will definitely let you know. But definitely, if you see me, if you recognize me, stop me and talk to me. And definitely, I'm looking forward to meeting you, whether you're a listener or a guest. So, if you haven't listened to the previous episode of Let's Talk Micro, that was part one of a two-part episode regarding when a network system from a hospital goes down. So last week, the first part with Dr. Christina Wojewoda aired. So it was released. And she's from the University of Vermont Medical Center. She's the director of clinical microbiology there. And she tells her story about, her hospital network going down and how this affected the hospital. But we focus, since I'm a medical laboratory scientist and she works in a lab, so she focused on the aspect from the laboratory's point of view. So she started talking about, what happened, when did they notice something was wrong, and what plan they came up with. So on today's episode is the conclusion of this. So what they continued doing, when the issue was resolved, what happened, and she offers advice on what to do when you experience situations like this. Because, like I mentioned before, this is something that could happen to any of the hospitals, to any hospital. So we need to be prepared, have some sort of plan. Technology is wonderful. It definitely, it helps us a lot. But when it goes down, what do we do? So we need to be prepared for situations like this. So part one was great. If you haven't checked it out, go ahead and do so. And then once you do that, come back and listen to the conclusion. So part two with Dr. Christina Wojewoda. Let's go ahead and listen to it. And then you also mentioned, right? So you had some forms that had QR codes, right? So can you talk about those?
Sure. So this is something that our CLIA director and our chemistry director thought up, which I just thought was brilliant. So we quickly figured out that there were no reference ranges on our results, especially, that's not as big of a deal in microbiology because the reference range usually is negative. But for things like chemistry, the instrument printouts didn't have the reference range on it. And so we started out by first putting a QR code on signs that we could paste up around the hospital that took providers to the our test catalog, which I don't know about you, but nobody ever goes to look at our test catalog. So we kind of directed them there so that they could know what samples to collect, what the reference ranges were, those kinds of things. We also made a QR code that talked about routine turnaround times now, because this is new normal. We're not going to be able to live up to our turnaround times that we had in the past. And we were getting calls relatively frequently about negative blood cultures. Is the blood culture still negative? We were like, we got this. If it's positive, we'll let you know. And so, just alerting them to that fact. And then some results like EGFR, for example, those are calculations that are always done in the system. Now the providers had values, and so the QR codes could walk them through that calculation piece. So it helped push out information to the clinical teams from the laboratory, from trusted references, so that they weren't trying to figure it out on their own.
As you're talking about this, and I keep thinking about the handwritten results, and I can think about it like in microbiology. Sometimes, I think we had one day where things from like the Vitek weren't crossing over, and that was like a very long day. So I can't imagine that just going one by one and then, transcribing all those results. Oh, yeah, definitely you need as many people as you can get for that. Once again, going through the timeline. So what about day 22? And then, yes, 22.
Day 22. So day 22, we were told that we would be back online in 3 days. And so we decided what started on paper stayed on paper. It was going to be too hard to back enter everything. At that point, we were able to get Epic read-only access. And so we at least could find some patients, figure out some patient history, which we didn't have before. I don't know about where you work, but we're pretty used to doing rounds on microbiology twice a day, where we look at what's growing, we take a look at patient history, we decide on how to report certain things. That all had to go away during downtime. We just reported everything we had because we couldn't make a clinical judgment at that point. So we started getting a little bit of information back. And at this point, thankfully, our CLIA director was very involved in the cutover plan and how we were going to start back up. Because it's not just flipping a switch. And so they were working on that for a while. Not everything started up at the same time. So some of our blood bank modules, we use a separate blood bank module that was not up and running. And the big oops on our part was we didn't realize that all of our interfaces, such as to the state health department, weren't up and running. And so if you look back at the COVID data in November of 2020, we've got a little false outbreak because we thought we were reporting all of the results through the interface, but they weren't going anywhere. So we had to retrospectively report all of our COVID results to our state health department a few weeks later. So things came back up slowly, but it felt okay. The areas where it was the most cumbersome were areas like mycobacteriology, where where you have samples, culture results that go for 8 weeks. Well, so 8 weeks you're working in parallel worlds. You have both paper and you have electronic systems, and so that was difficult to navigate for a while.
Wow. And and you also, you mentioned some limbo cases. So what are those?
Yes. So those were are kind of they started pre or post. They happened right on the shoulders of the downtime, and so those were cases that really got lost in the shuffle, especially reflex testing, so HPV on positive PAPs. So the PAP result went out, but the HPV result never got reported. for a lot of those, we could still salvage the sample. It was still good, still viable, but for some of them, we weren't able to, and so those we had to send for recollection. And then we also had to tell providers that, if you're still looking for a result on your patient and you don't have it at this point, we can't provide it for you, and you're going to have to recollect. Thankfully, all of our anatomic pathology cases, all of those were accounted for. So it was more blood and urine type samples, but those were the ones we had to send out a note to providers saying that we don't have a result for this. You're going to have to recollect.
Yeah, I see that. And, like sometimes even if there's not like an order that has a reflex, they order, like, for example, they just ordered a regular urinalysis and then they realize after the fact, oh, let me order the culture. And sometimes, if you don't have someone that's monitoring those orders and you don't have a system, then those will definitely not get performed. And then by the time someone realizes, the sample has been discarded. And so it's like, if you need it in this case, then we ask for a recollect.
Yeah, we early on we had to let people know that there was no add-on testing, because we had no good way of knowing where the sample was filed. Essentially, in our current system, we have tube storage, and we can look exactly where to find the sample. We just didn't have the bandwidth to go hunting for samples for add-ons. So yeah, they had to get a new sample if they wanted something additional.
Yeah, that's true. Because you typically check, okay, who, where is it at? Like, we do in our lab sometimes, who finalized it, where did it go? And yeah, it's definitely very time consuming. You're not gonna be able to sift through all, and then for every request, it's just, yeah, it's not realistic. So I can definitely see that. So when was the system fully online?
So day 25, we were back, and day 30 to day 60, we went and tried to do as deep of a risk assessment as we could. So we went back, looked at any patient complaints, provider complaints, looking to see. That's where we discovered the HPV not reflexing issue. So it took us about 2 months to kind of work through all of that, and make sure that, as far as we can tell, we did the best we could with all of the patient samples that we had.
Okay. And so what were the lessons learned from this?
So many. So as much as you possibly can, you need to stop samples coming into the laboratory, because once they're in the laboratory, they're your problem. And so contacting all of the providers and groups that you work with, asking them to send things to other reference laboratories. If you can divert them, if you're in a system, we were able, this is a micro talk, but for our anatomic pathology, we were able to relocate some of our anatomic pathologists and samples down to a hospital, but in our network that still had connectivity. So that's an option. Shutting down phlebotomy sites, asking providers to only order things if it's absolutely necessary for urgent patient care. Anything you can do to decrease the samples coming in, because that lowers your risk of anything going wrong. Thinking about how you're going to communicate within your laboratory, within the hospital system, how you're going to get results out to providers. So making sure that you have an up-to-date Rolodex or listing of providers and phone numbers and ordering locations, because you'll get all combinations of those. So being able to communicate results back is super important. I'm not super aware of all of the billing implications. I know that we lost a lot of money during this, but if the plan is to bill for any of the testing that's performed, thinking ahead of time about what what information is going to be needed, making sure you have appropriate ICD-10 codes, all of that kind of stuff. Again, the bouncer worked really well for us. And so putting in some barrier between the laboratory and others is important. And same thing with routing all of the phones out of the lab to a central calling system to make sure that the lab staff can really focus on their work. Again, because they're handwriting patient names on plates and dates of birth, making sure that all of that is legible for the next tech who works up that culture is super important. You're going to have to get all of the fax machines you can possibly get your hands on and repurpose staff that aren't able to do their routine jobs to fax those results out and file all of the results afterwards, and then be able to pull those results and fax them again when somebody else calls for them. We were lucky that our document control system was external to our hospital system. So our document control system is Media Lab. Again, I'm not promoting Media Lab, but it was very nice because it was just on the web. And so we could access that from either computers on the guest network for the hospital or on our phones. So that way things were accessible. And then you're going to need to hardwire printers. You're going to have encrypted USB drives. That's how we were able to get our COVID results to the state health department over time, rather than faxing all of them. We just sent USB drives back and forth. And eventually we figured out having a label printer in the micro lab, because if you can think of, your anaerobic culture, at least for us, that's 6 plates plus a thio plus slides, and the handwriting, all of that gets pretty old. So we set up a label printer so that at least it was legible. It probably took about the same amount of time, but that way people's hands didn't cramp up. And just be flexible. Things will change 8 million times throughout the process, but everybody's got good ideas, and just take them, try them. Trying to think about this ahead of time before it happens. We didn't have ways to document our culture workups ahead of time. So think about how you would want to do that in a paper world. Build forms, pass them around, show them around to your friends, and see if there's ways to improve them. And then you have them on the shelf to just make photocopies of when you need them, so that you're not trying to do that all in real time.
Yeah, like if we think about it, we definitely not use that much paper anymore for and handwrite stuff. So yeah, and all these little things that we don't think about, and then when that happens, you start thinking about, like you say, reference ranges and all this stuff. So yeah, definitely, we're so used to all that being on the computer. So from our testing, a lot of the instruments, they cross over, and then we just accept, and some of them even autofile. So definitely, technology plays a huge role. So these were, lessons, and they're also applied to advice for the audience. Is there anything else that you can advise them?
My biggest piece of advice is reach out for help. Unfortunately, there's a growing network now of laboratories that have gone through this. And I can at least speak for my laboratory, but I'm more than willing to offer advice, to chat with anybody that happens to find themselves in this situation, because there are things you just don't think of until you're in it. And while I know it's a CAP checklist requirement, and I know that everybody aims to have a downtime procedure that's all encompassing, I just don't think you can plan for this for every little iteration. And so please reach out, find others who have gone through this, get different ideas, and just lean on people for help, because when you're in it, you feel very isolated. And there are others that have gone through this, and I think our community is pretty willing to help.
Yes, definitely. So is there anything else that you want to anything else that you have to add?
I don't think so. It was a wild ride.
It definitely, sounds like it. And you were talking about the downtown procedures and, that we do. And realistically, since most people maybe don't experience it, and like I mentioned, sometimes you have some very short ones, and sometimes it happens on night shifts. So whoever works during days. So some people might have gone through many years of work and never experienced one. So definitely might not even be familiar with the procedure. Where's the stuff? So, you get also part-time employees, yeah, per diem. So all that adds to the mix where you find yourself in this situation. It's like, okay, what do we do? So, maybe hopefully you have someone there that's familiar with it, but that's a big challenge. Well, this has been great. And, shout out to you and your team because in regular times, this will be very tough. And then you add that all the challenges that COVID presented, lack of supplies, you're overworked, a huge amount of testing, you're working with a mask, the uncertainty of what's going to happen. Are you going to catch it? Are you not? So a lot of rapid changes. So that definitely those were very difficult times when you had this. So definitely, shout out to you and your team.
Well, thank you. I would not have made it through without my staff. They were amazing. And everybody pitched in. I think, through COVID, something like this, your team gets closer together and everybody pulls through to make sure that we're doing the best we can for patient care.
Exactly. So yes, definitely, teamwork is very essential, and regular times and in down times is just, the end goal is to do the best that we can for the patients and produce the best results and so they can be treated properly. So definitely your team show displayed, a huge amount of teamwork. Definitely. Well, Dr. Wojewoda, it's been great listening to this. Like I said to the audience, I listened to it before, but it's just once again, it was so engaging. So thank you for taking the time to come in into Let's Talk Micro.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And that, my dear audience, it's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story about what happens when a network goes down. This is very important because this could happen to any of us working in a hospital or in a laboratory. So we need to be prepared. Definitely, we're so used to the system, right? We find samples, we look up results. In micro, it's a big important part, right? Definitely for referencing cultures and doing things like that. So we need to be prepared. So thank you, Dr. Wojewoda, for telling us your story. As always, thank you for the support again. Continue downloading episodes. And I hope to see some of you on ASM Micro. So, as always, continue bringing that passion to what you do. It's so important. As you know, we do such great work. So, stay motivated, stay safe, and of course, continue talking micro. Until the next time. Bye.